Welcome to Plain Civics. Thank you for joining us. I'm Joe Ulery.
And I'm Bobbi Fisher.
Our goal is to break down how government works so you can make the government work for you. And Bobbi, today we are up to episode 41.
We finished the Ben Franklin 13 Civic Virtues, and now we're moving to George Washington's Rules of Civility. These are a collection of etiquette guidelines that he copied by hand as a teenager around the age of 14 into a school notebook. The rules were not originally written by Washington. They were adapted from a set of French maxims created by Jesuit scholars in the late 1500s and that later were translated into English. Washington likely copied them as a handwriting exercise, but he took them seriously throughout his life. The rules emphasize respect, self-control, humility, honesty, and consideration for others, qualities that became associated with his leadership. We will cover 5 of his rules in our opening segment, and over the course of the next 22 episodes, we will present these in modernized language while preserving their original meaning. And if you want to see the original, the way they worded stuff, they're easy to just Google and look up, but I wanted to give them in so people understood them today. So in this episode, we present rules 1 through 5. Number 1, show respect whenever others are present. 2, when with others, don't sing, whistle, or drum your fingers unless appropriate. 3, look people in the eye when speaking, but don't stare. 4, don't laugh at someone else's misfortune. And 5, if you must cough, sneeze, or yawn, turn away and cover your mouth.
So we are doing Say What Part 3 today.
And now our feature presentation.
I, of course, realized through teaching and so forth that Americans have all these misconceptions about different parts of our government and stuff that has to do with civics. So back in August of last year, in 2025, we did our first Say What episode. And so we're basically just debunking common misconceptions. In that case, and you can go, I'm telling you when these occurred in case people missed these and want to go back and catch up, since we're doing 5 new ones today. But in that first Say What episode, we debunked the misconceptions about freedom of speech, which I would highly recommend, whether the U.S. was created as a Christian nation, immigrants and rights, students being forced to pledge allegiance or pray, and whether executive orders issued by the president are laws. And then we followed that up in January of this year. In episode 27, we covered 5 more misconceptions, including what impeachment really means, which a lot of people don't understand,
Right.
Whether the United States is a democracy, and the use of different terms like people want to argue, are we a democratic republic? Are we a constitutional republic? Are we a constitutional democracy? And we talk about how those all are kind of interchangeable. Use of a Bible during the swearing in of federal officials, what voting a straight ticket means, and removal of the president using the 25th Amendment. So in this episode, we're going to explain 5 more common misconceptions about our government and issues related to it.
Okay, so that brings us to number 11, misconception number 11. Doesn't the President of the United States have complete power and control over the government?
No, actually, the president's powers are limited by the Constitution. The President of the United States is one of the most powerful elected leaders in the world, but the office was intentionally designed with limits, which we've talked about numerous times. The authors of the Constitution feared giving too much power to any one person because they had just fought a war against a king. They created a system of separation of powers and checks and balances so that the president, Congress, and the federal courts would each limit the others. Congress makes laws, the courts interpret them, and the system of checks and balances prevents any one of those branches from becoming too powerful. The limits on the executive branch or presidential powers mean that the president cannot make new laws, as only the legislative branch or Congress has the power to make laws. If Congress passes a law the president doesn't like, the president can veto it. But if 2/3 of both the House and the Senate vote again for the bill, it can become law anyway. Congress also has what is known as the power of the purse. This means the president cannot create a new program or spend money on something like building a new military base, for example, without Congress appropriating and approving the funds for it. The president nominates people for important positions, such as cabinet secretaries, federal judges, Supreme Court justices, and ambassadors, but many cannot take office until confirmed by the Senate. The Senate can reject nominees if they do not feel the president's choices are qualified, and that's known as advice and consent.
One of the current examples going on right now, and we're recording, it's the last week of July in 2026. One current example of that going on right now is there are hearings underway for Attorney General with President Trump's choice, Todd Blanche. And so right now that is in a committee, and that committee will have to vote to confirm him or recommend him onto the full Senate. So there's quite a process, but just to give a current example of how that is going. And right now, sitting here today, we're not sure how that's going to go after Lindsey Graham's death. And there are two Republicans that are lame ducks, basically, because they got voted out in the primary. And so we're not sure if that nomination will make it out of the initial stage to the full Senate. So there are lots of different things that play into this.
Exactly. And that's good to point out because so many of these things are a process that are, that's supposed to be followed. It's important that the process is followed so that we know that our leaders are following the laws of the Constitution and doing things the way they're supposed to be done. Checks and balances and all that doesn't work.
They don't work, right? And it's nice to also have to make people go on record on whether or not they support this person.
Right. And looking at, and we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, the senators, for example, that are voting, their constituents are looking too. And if that candidate ends up being not so great and they voted for him, it could affect their future electability. So
absolutely. Yep.
All of these things are tied together. All right, moving on. Presidential actions, such as executive orders, which we've talked about before, immigration policies, regulations, and actions during emergencies are all subject to what is known as judicial review. Federal courts, and especially the Supreme Court, can determine whether presidential actions violate the Constitution. If they do, the actions can be blocked by the court. The president cannot ignore the U.S. Constitution, federal court orders, or federal laws. Every president takes an oath to, quote, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. And just a reminder, no president is above the law. If a president commits serious misconduct or violates the Constitution or laws, Congress may remove them from office through the impeachment process. The process has two steps. First, the House of Representatives votes to impeach or bring the formal charges against the president. Second, the Senate holds a trial and can remove the president with a 2/3 vote. Only a few presidents have been impeached and none have been removed by conviction in the Senate. Also, presidential control is limited because they cannot serve indefinitely. The 22nd Amendment limits a president to 2 elected terms or a maximum of 10 years in certain circumstances. For example, say they were vice president and they had to take over for a previous president. So they, depending on how long that fill-in situation is, they still cannot exceed the 10 years in office.
Wow. That one I didn't know.
So presidential control is also limited because the United States is a federal system, meaning power is divided between the national government and the states. Many laws and regulations that affect our daily lives are primarily controlled by state governments, including things like education policies, driver's licenses, and speed limits, local policing, state elections, and property law. The president cannot simply take over these responsibilities. Presidents can issue executive orders to direct how the executive branch carries out existing laws. However, executive orders cannot create new laws, cannot violate the Constitution, can be blocked by courts, can often be changed or revoked by future presidents, and may be limited by Congress through legislation.
And Bobbi, we've seen the courts do to both political parties, presidents from both Republican and Democrat Party. We've seen courts strike down executive orders on both sides.
Right. And when the next president comes in, especially like of the other party, more than likely they're going to eliminate
many of
the procedures, because that's really as we've talked about in previous episodes, the president's job is to run like all of the cabinet, like the Treasury Department and Secretary of State, based on what their agenda is. If they're the other party, obviously there's always some things that stay in place.
Right.
The president also serves as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, but is not allowed to make military and war decisions by himself or herself. Only Congress has the power to declare war. Congress funds the military and can place limits on military operations. This division of power helps prevent one person from deciding when the nation goes to war. And of course, we're seeing this play out currently, which it hasn't played out all the way yet, but we're in a war right now that really nobody seems to have wanted, or very few.
I come from a family that has several of my cousins, my family, a lot of people have served in the military, still are. And this past week, when the president removed the 4 names of 4 fallen soldiers who died during combat, I know we bill this as not being a political podcast, and I truly am not trying to be political, but it did shatter my heart for those families of those 4 service members who were subtracted from the death count for the people involved in the Iran war. And I just wanted to throw that out there. I know that there are other people that agree with me. There are people that don't agree with me, but I can't imagine being a member of a family who lost somebody fighting in a war for this country, and then their death is sort of diluted and not included.
Minimalized, right.
Yeah, so I just wanted to throw that out there for what it's worth.
Well, and I'll also add, since, this is what we're talking about, since this is kind of a bone of contention right now, whether, the fact that we went into this war in Iran without approval of the Senate, which is who's really supposed to approve. The president did not go and ask permission. In fact, throughout this whole several months now, the Senate has really been given limited information. And this is where we go back to, this is why checks and balances are so important, and being held accountable. And if Congress wanted to step up strongly, they could stop this right now. And I just want to point that out. Congress, if you're paying any attention at all, you notice has not really done what they should be doing the last, few years. They're just not doing their part in withholding the separation of powers and checks and balances.
Yeah.
People should think about when they vote.
Absolutely. And one other thing that I guess I just want to get off my mind and share, and it's in my full-time job as a journalist, I do a political newscast where we present both sides of issues. And the war is something that we cover on a daily basis. And right now, as we're writing stories, back to the numbers of the people injured, and you mentioned that we're not sure that we're getting full transparency on all these things. What numbers do we use? Right. How many people have been injured in the war? And what number do we use for the number of dead? I mean, these things keep changing. And it seems like, again, this is a practicability as I write the newscast. I want to report the facts, but sometimes the facts aren't updated and they're not available. And I don't know, are they being slow walked? I just feel like there's a gap in reporting.
Well, and that's exactly. And I can remember back when the Vietnam War was going on, and of course we didn't have all of the 24/7 news and all that, but I can remember on the nightly news, and I was only a teenager at the time, but them reporting on how many casualties, and casualty doesn't mean death. It means, killed, wounded, or missing or whatever. And we would get updates on that. And I realized a while back, before it even was talked about on the news, that we're not hearing about, except maybe in little bits and pieces. Oh, there were 100 soldiers that were injured in like that first bombing. It's like we're not finding that out as fast as we have in past situations in Iraq too, and Afghanistan.
And I'm not sure why we're not. That's a question. This whole episode's about, asking questions, getting multiple sources, all those things. I'm not sure why today we don't know for a fact how many people have been injured, and now there's this murkiness of how many people have died. I just, as a
Right.
reporter, that bothers me that we can't just give straight facts about what's happening on the ground. And I know this has been something that's happened in every war where, you have to have boots on the ground to report. But it just, again, this really bothers me. And it really hinders me sometimes from being able to do my job.
The skeptic in me says, why?
Why?
Why are we not being told? What are
Right.
we, what's being hidden, or what's the purpose
For
of
these
hiding
heroes,
that?
because they are heroes. People, people give up their lives, they leave their families, they put stuff on hold, they're away from their children, and then for us to not know their status, I mean, to treat them anything less than a hero when they are injured or participating in a war, again, I've got a really big problem with that. And I'm probably crossing all kinds of lines today, but it's just heavy on my heart for these
We need to
families.
ask questions. I
Yeah,
mean, no matter who's in power,
I agree.
it doesn't matter. So finally, although it's not a constitutional limit, public opinion is an important practical constraint on power. A president who loses public support may find it much harder to convince Congress to pass legislation, win re-election, and build support for major initiatives. In a democracy, political influence often depends on public trust. The framers believe that power should never be concentrated in one person or one branch of government. By dividing authority among the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, and between the federal government and the states, they sought to protect individual liberty and reduce the risk of tyranny. As James Madison wrote in Federalist Number 51, quote, ambition must be made to counteract ambition, end quote. In other words, each branch of government was given enough power to check the others, making cooperation necessary and helping to ensure that no president can govern alone. However, this system will only continue to work if all three branches carry out their assigned roles, which is what I just mentioned a couple minutes ago, and I cannot stress that enough.
Now we're up to number 12, question 12, misconception number 12. My vote won't make a difference. Why should I vote? Wow.
Every vote matters because elections are not just about choosing leaders. They're also about giving us, the people, a voice in how the country, state, and our communities are governed. While one vote may seem small, elections are the combined result of millions of individual choices. History shows that even a handful of votes can determine who wins an election or whether a law is approved. Many local, state, and even national elections have been decided by very small margins.
Yeah.
And I made a note here, and just recently in our Indiana primary, we had 4 districts
very close,
that had very close. We're talking in a couple cases, just a few hundred votes or a couple hundred votes. And in one district, very close to where I live, 3 votes, which of course is going to a recount, but 3 votes separated the 2 candidates.
Here's another example. State Senator, this is again, if you're listening elsewhere outside of Indiana, and we cite these cases because we're familiar with them because, we're right next to them. But State Senator Liz Brown, who's at our state house, and she's up from around Fort Wayne, 14 votes is all that separated her from her opponent. So every single vote matters. The three vote separation, man, that proves it right there.
That's over in Lafayette.
Hopefully they didn't forget to vote for themselves.
You would hope.
Yeah.
The point is, every vote contributes to the outcome. Many elections are decided by very small margins. There have even been elections decided by 1 vote. I didn't look that up, but I know that is the case. It's fact.
Wow.
When elections are close, every additional vote has even greater significance. The U.S. government is based on the principle of popular sovereignty, which means that political power comes from the people. Voting is the primary way citizens exercise that power. Even if your preferred candidate does not win, your vote is part of the public's collective voice. People often focus on presidential elections, but local elections can have an even greater impact on everyday life. Local officials make decisions about public schools, roads and transportation, police and fire services, parks, libraries, property taxes, utilities, and zoning and development. These elections frequently have much lower voter turnout, meaning each vote carries even more weight. High voter participation strengthens democracy. When more eligible citizens vote, election results better reflect the wishes of the people, government officials have greater legitimacy, and leaders are more accountable because they know citizens are paying attention. And I cannot stress those three sentences enough.
I was just thinking about that with a highlighter in my hand. I'm like, we need to highlight these,
Yeah.
especially right now with so many divisive things going on. And these aren't just Indiana things, but one thing that comes to mind right now, and it's not even a political argument, it is AI data centers.
Yeah.
There are people on both sides of that in different parties that are really frothed up rightfully about that. They have lots of questions. So that's, again, what we're talking about today is you need to be involved in this because it could happen in your backyard. You need to be following what they're talking about in the U.S. Congress about these AI data centers and who pays for the electricity. Where's the water coming from? What are the covenances on what can be built around them? That's one example right now. I think the silver lining to them is that people are paying attention more now.
Right. Seems like I would say over the course of the last 10 years, let's just say, we went from wind farms, seeing little signs out about no wind farms.
Yep.
Then it was solar farms.
Yes.
And that didn't last very long because it quickly went to the data centers as being the big thing. But so people do pay attention. And, I want to think that maybe we're getting better at that as far as looking at local issues.
Yeah, I agree. So again, participation.
Yeah. And candidates do study who votes and where vote turnout is high. Communities with consistent voter participation often receive more attention because elected officials know those citizens are engaged and likely to hold them accountable. A healthy democracy depends on an informed and engaged voter. Throughout American history, many groups work to secure or protect the right to vote. Participating in elections is one way to exercise a right that many Americans struggled to obtain. As President Theodore Roosevelt once said, quote, "The first requisite of a good citizen in this republic of ours is that he shall be able and willing to pull his own weight," end quote. For many Americans, voting is one of the most important ways to fulfill that civic responsibility. We all need to pull our own weight.
I think right now, more than ever, it's important to communicate with your elected representatives. We always talk about the 5 Calls app where you can contact your legislative representatives and elected officials. But I've noticed, this is an observation, I've noticed that what used to just be common for elected officials to come home from Washington and meet with constituents in like a town hall style meeting, I've noticed that's not happening as much anymore. And I know some have gone to doing it over the telephone, and it just seems more restrictive. And, when you're not face to face.
Yeah, it's less personal.
But the way this works is they're supposed to listen to us, right? And then go vote. And when they're not meeting with us in person as much as they used to, or they have a reluctancy to meet with us in person.
Because they work for us.
They work for us. That's right. It's like, that would be like your boss saying, I want to meet with you next Monday at 7:00, and you tell your boss, no, sorry, I can't, I'm not going to be able to talk to you. Maybe we can do a quick text or phone call. But we probably should take a break. So let's do our history lesson.
Don't know much about history.
This is our Don't Know Much About History segment. On May 25th, 1787 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, enough delegates to do business, which is what's known as a quorum, was finally present at the convention to revise and improve the nation's first constitution, the Articles of Confederation. George Washington was unanimously elected to preside over the meetings. 12 of the 13 states sent delegates. Only Rhode Island declined. They were satisfied with the way things were. At the height of the convention, there were 55 delegates who discussed and debated the Constitution during the 4 months of the convention. In addition to Washington, some other prominent participants included James Madison, Benjamin Franklin, and Alexander Hamilton, but but not Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence, because he was serving as the ambassador to France at the time. About half of the delegates had attended college, which was a large percentage for the time. About 60% of the delegates were lawyers, 45% were farmers or plantation owners, 35% had been in the military, 30% had been judges, 20% were merchants or businessmen, and a small number were educators, physicians, or ministers. You might notice that those don't add up to 100. That's because a lot of these delegates had multiple...
Right. Could be a farmer and an attorney.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why that doesn't add up, not because I'm bad at math.
But I am bad at math.
Well, I am too, but that's not why. So the delegates did not represent a cross-section of Americans. All were white males, and there were no women, enslaved people, or Native Americans present. Nearly all owned land, and some owned enslaved people. Despite the lack of a diversity of the participants, the document they created has endured because they made it flexible. And of course, that's our current U.S. Constitution.
All right, so we are getting back to work here. Misconception number 13. Don't government officials work for political parties?
No, actually, in the United States, elected public officials serve all of the people they represent, not just the people who voted for them or members of their political party. Public officials take an oath to support and defend the Constitution, and that's whether it's the Constitution of the U.S. or our state constitutions, and they are expected to represent and serve the public, even though political parties influence policy and elections. To put it in simple terms, a mayor serves every resident of the city, a governor serves every resident of the state, a member of Congress serves everyone in their congressional district or state if they're a senator, and the president is supposed to serve all Americans. Serving everyone does not mean that every person will agree with every decision. People often have different opinions about taxes, education, healthcare, public safety, and many other issues. An elected official must and should listen to different viewpoints, consider the facts, and make decisions that they believe are best for the people they represent and consistent with the Constitution and the law. Sometimes this means making decisions that are unpopular with some voters, but that the official believes are in the public interest. Because elected officials serve the public, they are accountable to the people. Citizens can contact their representatives to express their views, attend public meetings, if they have them, vote in future elections, participate in civic organizations and public discussions, and peacefully advocate for change. This accountability helps ensure that elected officials remain responsive to the people they serve. After an election is over, an elected official's responsibility is to represent everyone in the community they were chosen to serve, whether they are of the same political party or not, while faithfully upholding the Constitution and the laws.
Number 14, misconception number 14. If my elected representative changes his or her mind about whether he or she supports an issue or a law, should I be upset? Aren't they just selling out or showing weakness?
Absolutely not. In a representative democracy like the United States, discussion, debate, and compromise are not flaws in the system. They are some of its greatest strengths. The founders designed our government with the expectation that people would disagree. Instead of settling disagreements through force or allowing one group to dominate everyone else, they created a system where elected officials must and should work together to solve problems. Discussion, debate, and compromise are important because no one has all of the information or answers, and people come to the table with different life experiences and knowledge. So listening to each other, asking questions, and changing your mind if you learn something new should be celebrated. Also, compromising in areas where you can reach common ground benefits everyone because it prevents deadlocks and inaction.
It's basically, if you're not compromising, nothing is happening. Nothing.
Right.
And so you have to consider, is nothing better than getting some of what you want? Or would you rather get nothing at all?
And, you know, we wouldn't have had a lot of things in our history happen, like the Constitution or the end of the Civil War. Or, I mean, I could go on, if people weren't willing to give some things up to come to a compromise.
Yeah.
So it's a very important part of our history. And compromising is not selling out or a sign of weakness. It does not mean abandoning your core values. That would be selling out. It means finding a solution that moves the country forward while protecting the principles you believe are most important. Strong leaders are confident enough to hear opposing viewpoints, explain their own positions, and negotiate honestly. It often takes more courage to compromise than to refuse. Standing firm and saying no can be easier than working through difficult disagreements to reach an agreement. Laws supported by members of both parties are often more stable because they have broader public support, and they're less likely to be reversed when political power changes. Democracy is not about one side always winning. It is about finding solutions that allow people with different opinions to work together peacefully. Throughout American history, Congress has also relied on compromise to pass budgets, fund national defense, improve transportation, reform taxes, strengthen civil rights, and to respond to national emergencies. Compromise, when done with integrity, is a sign of responsible leadership. Strong public servants stand firm on their core principles while remaining willing to work with others to find practical solutions that serve the common good.
All right. Our last misconception today is number 15. All news media today is fake news. None of it can be trusted, can it?
First of all, not all news media today is fake news.
Right.
There are still several news sources that can be trusted, but with an important caution. You should trust processes more than brands. There is no major news organization in 2026 that is perfectly objective. I'm not sure there ever has been, right? Every newsroom has to make editorial judgments, has blind spots, and occasionally makes mistakes. The goal is not to find a source with no bias. It's to find sources that are accurate, transparent, willing to correct errors, and clearly separate news from opinion.
That part is so important, of separating the news from opinion. And on any given 24/7 news channel that you turn on, they all have opinion programs. They're not clearly marked as opinion programs. In fact, I would argue that it seems to me that they are appearing more as a news source, some of these, and it can get confusing. So, when you have the pundits on and the people talking and stuff, those are just conversations. They're not necessarily giving you facts. What we're talking about here is like the Washington Post or the New York Times, AP, Associated Press, or Reuters. Those do still have opinion sections, but they are clearly news sources. And when they do opinions on those platforms, they clearly mark it as opinion.
The bottom line is be cautious about any source that relies heavily, especially on anonymous social media posts without verification, who mixes opinion into straight news stories, like you were just saying.
Yep.
Rarely issues corrections, uses emotionally charged headlines designed to provoke outrage, or tells you that only they are telling the truth while everyone else is lying. These are warning signs, regardless of whether the source leans left, right, or somewhere else. One of the best habits you can develop doesn't ask the question, can I trust this outlet? But by asking some other questions, such as 1, is this reporting or opinion? 2, what evidence is provided? 3, can I find the same basic facts in 2 or 3 independent news organizations? And 4, what do the primary sources, such as court documents, government reports, speeches, data, actually say? And I would add there even video.
Yes.
Although we may have to be more cautious about that.
I know, because of AI. You're right. And you mentioned social media in there a little bit. So I just want to point out to people, you mentioned headlines too, that seemed a little too juicy for realness. What they're doing, these sites make their revenue on the number of eyeballs that read their posts, right? And or the number of papers they sell or the number of viewers they have. So you have to be leery of that, because again, that's what they're looking out for, is their bottom line revenue. And then one other thing I want to talk about is algorithms. So when you click on a news story or an opinion or a video, hopefully you don't think that you just visit that and it all goes away, because it doesn't. It remembers everything you click on, and then it tailors your feed on any social media platform based on what you've clicked on. And those are called algorithms. So the point I wrote down here is just remember your social media feed isn't designed to make you informed. It's designed to keep you engaged. Outrage keeps people scrolling, and that's something every news consumer should keep in mind.
And I think even now with smartphones, I think they listen to us too.
Gosh.
So if here's you talking to a friend and all of a sudden you look at your phone and you've got websites or Facebook pages or whatever popping up on what you just talked about. So it knows.
It does know. We just did a river float for my birthday over the weekend. And on that river float, we were talking about weight loss medications, right? All these different, Roe and Hims and Hers and all those. Yes, those things. And I kid you not, I woke up this morning and every other post on my feed was the different brands that you can get, the Wegovy and there's a bazillion of them. But I think there's a setting you can go into on your phone and turn off whether or not it's listening to you, but I think it defaults to listening to you based on what I saw this morning.
I'm pretty sure it does. So currently, the 5 top news sources that tend to have the strongest reputations for factual reporting are Reuters, Associated Press, which you'll a lot of times see listed as AP, BBC News, the Wall Street Journal, and The Economist. I would also add the Wall Street Journal, in addition to the New York Times and the Washington Post, which are all daily national newspapers, are also still highly respected news sources. And like you said earlier, yes, they have opinion sides, but they also have actual trained reporters, which is something else. A lot of these 24/7 news, if you look up a lot of the people, the so-called reporters on there, a lot of them are not journalists by trade. They're talking heads, basically.
Yeah. And Bobbi, we talked about, how important it is for the Supreme Court to have a role and how important it is for the House of Representatives to play their role, or in the Senate with the executive branch and all the different branches that are in play. But there's almost like this unofficial fourth branch that I consider to be the
fourth estate.
Right. Because, if you look back in time, we wouldn't have known about all of the things that happened in Watergate, and a president resigned over it if the Washington Post would not have stayed on that story. Currently, there are New York Times reporters that have been subpoenaed to court. Those were dismissed, those subpoenas. But I mean, the press plays a very important role in keeping our government honest. And I think that anybody that tells you that a legitimate press agency is fake news, you should be getting red cards, and red flags should be going all over the place. Right.
Not just Watergate, but lots of things in our past. We can attribute to the fourth estate or the news journalism. Okay, so if Reuters and AP, for example, and maybe one of those other newspapers or a different newspaper with a different editorial perspective are all reporting the same core facts, that should boost your confidence about a particular news item. Now, organizations like Adfontes Media and All Sides, and I think I have the Alfontes Media. I think I posted it on our Facebook page back when we covered media in like episode 6, I think. They're like these charts that place all of the news organizations on a continuum, like left, right, and ones that are more in the middle. Those, it shows where they fall on the political spectrum. They're somewhat reliable. They're useful starting points, but they're not perfect or universally accepted. In fact, some researchers have recently criticized the methodology of certain media rating systems, so it's best not to treat their ratings as absolute truth. You could use them, like I said, as a guideline, and I know I've looked at like the Adfontes one and thought, why do they have that news site, like left of center or right? I mean, it's like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, agree.
Rather than relying on a single news source, we recommend creating a small news regimen where you use Reuters or the Associated Press for breaking news, a respected national newspaper like one of the ones I mentioned earlier, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, or Washington Post, for deeper reporting. Include one source that often has a different editorial perspective from your preferred outlet.
Yeah.
When an issue is especially important, read the underlying government report, court opinion, scientific paper, or transcript yourself. Often those are cited in the article, in the news story, or at the end. This approach won't eliminate bias, but it greatly reduces the chance that you'll be misled by any one outlet, and it improves the chances that you will be an informed citizen. And I know I've done that a lot of times. I'm reading something and I'm thinking, I don't know about that. And if it cites, something, sources,
As
I'll
it
go
should,
right to
yeah.
them, and look myself. And, like a lot of times I've done that, especially with like video snippets. And I go and watch like
Oh.
the whole thing and I see that, they posted this short snippet and they took it like
Out of
totally out of
context, yeah.
context. And if you listen to the whole thing, in fact, I just had an argument with somebody on Facebook about that particular thing over the weekend. It's like, watch the whole thing because that's not what she said.
Right. That happens all the time. And with you fold in AI and it's even worse. And I'm just sitting here listening to our conversation as we're going through this and thinking how sad it is that it's gotten to this point where you can't just read a news story anymore and know that it's news. You have to do all the homework to know that it's factual and to really truly know what's going on. There's a lot of legwork involved, and a responsibility comes with that on what you share too on your social medias. You should make sure that it's true before you hit the share button.
Right. I know I have a couple friends that it's like, oh, please look at this stuff before you post it. And I used to get on and like correct and put sore, and I just like, it's like,
it's exhausting.
I'd be doing that 24/7.
Yep. You can't police it all, but I used to be guilty of this. If it seems like really outrageous, definitely run it through the filters. But share responsibly.
But the point is, there are legitimate news sources out there. This, term fake news has been around now about 10 years. We won't go into where it started, but it really, kind of took hold, and it should be a fake term, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, there are fake news sites out there, but there are legitimate news sources. But you do have to work a little harder.
Yes.
And make, like I said, come up with this regimen, and you can find legitimate news.
And generally also, like, whoever is saying it's fake news, you have to also ask yourself the question, well, is that person saying it's fake news because whatever's being reported is damaging his or her reputation? Is it something, are they just trying to distract and say everybody's fake because they did something they don't want reported out? You have to check those motives as well.
All right. So that's the end of our episode of our misconceptions. We're going to be looking at, I haven't decided yet where we're going next, but some things I'm thinking about for upcoming episodes are looking at contradictions in our history that have affected our government and laws, changes Americans would like to see made to terms and age limits of candidates for federal offices, and some of the different forms of economic and government systems, because I hear so much lately about how terrible democratic socialists are and people saying that's communism. And we talked about those briefly in one of our earliest episodes, but I think maybe it wouldn't hurt to refresh everybody and maybe go a little deeper in the differences between things like communism and socialism and democratic socialism and capitalism. And those aren't just, they're not really government systems, they're economic systems that can affect the government, or the government can affect them, I guess we could say also.
So that's what I love about this podcast is we will never run out of things that we need to cover and talk about. Hopefully you're learning as we go through this. I learned a few things today that I didn't know, and so I really appreciate the legwork that you put into getting these episodes ready, Bobbi. And now it's time to see if you have been paying attention. It's time for the pop quiz.
So last episode's question, what are the two major political parties in the United States? Hopefully you said Democratic and Republican. We know we have minor parties, but those are the the two major ones.
It's not always been.
No,
Those haven't
and
always been the two parties.
You can go back. I think last year we did a whole podcast on the evolution of political parties.
Yeah.
So,
all right. And so next question.
Today's question, what is the name of the current Speaker of the House of Representatives?
We'll see if you're following that and know who that person is. Very good. Well, this was a spirited discussion today, to say the least.
Well, that's what we want.
Yeah.
I think that's what people like, too. They don't just like hearing me spew facts and so forth. So
And they were sitting out there listening and being like, why does Joe keep raising his hand in class? If you have some feedback for us, good or bad, let us know. You can always go into our Facebook page. We post a lot of information there that's related to the episodes, but it's also a place where you can send us some message or just comment right on the page, and that is Plain Civics. Just search for that on Facebook. Or if you want to send us a direct email, you can do that at plaincivicspodcast@gmail.com. Bobbi, thank you.
you're welcome. And I just updated our Facebook page last weekend. So
And it's a good place to go. There are lots of little asides that we have there, or if there's something that we don't have time to go to into depth during this podcast, then we'll have links that you can find there. I know you've done that a lot of times, or there's been drawings or illustrations that you've posted there for visual purposes as well.
And if nothing else, they can go and see what we look like and what our pets look like.
Right. And I've got another pet I need to add. We've got our grand dog that's lying at my feet as we record this today, but we'll get a picture of my daughter's dog Bobbi on there as well. I know that folks find that fun as well. All right. Thank you, Bobbi. That's
You're
it for
welcome.
this episode of Plain Civics, breaking down the basics. No politics, just facts. Thanks for listening. And until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.
This is Plain Civics. Join us for the journey as we break down the basics of how government works so you can make the government work for you.